Hello and welcome back to the Consistency Project Podcast. I'm Patrick Cummings, here as always with E.C. Sikowski. Each week here on the show, we aim to simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Great. This week, we're going to talk about whether it's okay if we eat the same thing every
day.
Stinking day. And I think for both of us, I hope the answer is yes. Because you and I think, have very similar diets in terms of
Correct.
Our consistency. How about better? We have consistent diets. Before we get into that, though, the holiday season is almost upon us, which means, of course, holiday parties and holiday desserts. If that's something that's been a challenge in years past, if you're not, EC has you covered. EC, let's talk very quickly about what you're going to do inside of the 3 Pillars Method app in December for folks who maybe have some troubles around all those holiday parties.
Yeah, I did this last year. We did like an accountability group,
Yeah.
and it was great because guess what? The 800-gram challenge works really well through the holidays because you still have the flexibility to enjoy the holidays.
Yes.
So we did an accountability group of just focusing on the 800-gram challenge for December, and so that's really the goal again this year, but now we're going to pull it off within the app. So there's going to be an improved Q&A feature for people who are already in the app. We're going to make that a bit better. And then we're also going to have some live streams through December and some fun prizes. So I think it's going to be a great way that people can kind of focus on, again, not letting the diet go too far, but still enjoying the holidays.
Love that. Okay, so a couple of things just to make sure folks know. OptimizeMeNutrition.com/December. If you want to go, that's probably the easiest and quickest way to do so. Second thing is if you're in the app, you're in this accountability group.
Yes.
You don't do anything special. So whenever you're listening to this, if you want to jump in early, get a head start, great. EC will see you there in December. And then the last thing is the pricing, which is going to be you can jump in at $397 for the entire year. But EC's also got a little payment plan for you. If you want to pay $39 a month, you can also go that route.
Yes.
Cool?
Yes.
All
And that pricing also allows them to continue, of course, after.
Of course,
and continue
yes. It's
down
not just the
3 pillars.
accountability group. You
Yeah.
get to keep rolling inside the 3 Pillars Method
Yeah.
app. Okay, cool. All right, let's get into this conversation. Let's talk about this common concern that I think a lot of people have. I've long since dropped this as a concern of mine. But okay, I eat the same thing every day. I don't want to be that adventurous. I don't want to put that much effort in. Is it going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why it's like something to think about is I actually encourage people to find these routine days and just live them on repeat, right?
Yep.
Especially once you already kind of know the numbers work out and you already like the foods and it's easy to prep. I mean, it's very tempting to say, okay, cool, this is just what I eat Monday to Friday or whatever it is. The main concern with it is really, I think people are concerned, well, am I just missing out on certain nutrients by eating the same exact thing every day? And so we kind of first need to ask, okay, well, what nutrients do we need in our diet for these weight, health, and fitness goals that are common? Okay, what are those nutrients? First, we need to make sure that we have the 3 different macros, protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Of course, those are going to add up to a certain number of calories, but we could say, okay, there's 3 variables right there, protein, carb, and fat we got to track or have a certain amount of. Then we have fiber, which, yes, is part of a macronutrient, part of carbohydrate, but still we kind of want to look at it independently. So now we're at 4 variables. Then we've got these micronutrients, and turns out there's 28 of them. So we've got 15 minerals and 13 vitamins. And so in total, we've got at least 32 different quantities that we want to see, okay, I have enough of these for my weight, health, and fitness goals. And that is a little bit surface level. We could kind of even drill down further into the types of fat or the types of protein. But nevertheless, it's like, wow, we've got 30 different quantities that we would actually want to see. Am I getting enough of each of them to make sure that I'm not missing out on anything?
All right, before we need to figure out, or before we talk about how, what happens if we do stay very consistent with our meals, how do we even know what those quantities would be? Let's say we're like, yeah, let's go 32 different things. I want to track them. How do we know what how do we know what the right amount is for each one of them?
Yeah, totally. Well, a lot of this we do work through in the 3 Pillars Method, and we going to figure out what those quantities are based on your goals, especially what the calories or the macronutrient split should be. But this also helps illustrate a lot of my thinking and approach to developing the 3 Pillars Method. How sustainable is tracking 30 plus things a day in your diet? I mean, a lot of people find weighing and measuring too tedious, even for something just like the 800-gram challenge, just trying to put fruits and vegetables on a scale, let alone now I'm going to say, okay, well, in addition to that, we're going to add 32 other things that you need to track today. And it's not just to sort of track it in the sense of I want to make sure I add up how much I 8 of each of those 30 plus different items. But somehow at the end of the day, you're going to have to then also check in and say, was my level correct? Did I actually get enough potassium? Did I actually get enough magnesium or whatever it is? So I think this idea of while we need at least 30 different nutrients to go right, if you will, each day, it really starts to fall apart when we start to think about sustainability and actually being able to measure this and check in on it. And so, yes, we'd have to measure them to be sure that we're getting them, but no one is going to do that. Now, some people would say, okay, well, there's an app for that. Can I just use an app to track all of the micros above and beyond the macros that might be in the 3 Pillars Method app or another app? And I would say kind of maybe. Chronometer I've used before and I love it in a lot of ways. They have a lot of great features and they have done a lot of work on having all of the micronutrient data in their database. And I'm sure some other apps do as well. The problem there is, even though you are collecting data, let's say, and you're seeing how much potassium and magnesium you ate today, I'm going to tell you it's not really accurate to what you ate. And we actually touched on this a little bit with the review of the Food Intelligence book recently. But nevertheless, those micronutrients, and really all of the nutrients to include the macronutrients, the nutrients in your food vary a lot between, let's say, one apple is not exactly the same as another apple, or one type of beef is not exactly the same as another type of beef. It's going to vary based on the variety, like Gala apple versus Honey Crisp, or this type of cattle grown on this type of farmland versus another place in the country or outside the U.S. The food varies based on the soil's health and the different minerals that are in the soil, as well as the environment. How much sun was the crop exposed to? Did it happen to be a rainy season or a sunny season? It also varies based on transport time and temperature. Did this thing come from California? It took days to get to you, or was it just down the road at the farm? And was it stored cool or was it stored hot? And then when it gets to your house, how long does it sit in the fridge before you actually use it? Oh, and what do you do to prepare it? Do you cook it? What are the temperatures at which you cook it? I mean, there's so many things that come into play in terms of how many nutrients are actually in your food. And I think the Food Intelligence book, said something like there's 2 to 3-fold difference in just the vitamin C content between orange varieties. So you can just take that concept and say, okay, well, now that's going to be true for fiber and carbs and magnesium and potassium and selenium and all this stuff, and see that there's just going to be this huge variation. So in these apps, when you select orange, it's kind of picking one standard value for orange, and you're just accepting it that, like, yeah, all oranges have the same amount of vitamin C, when in reality, that's not true. So there's a little bit of this feigned accuracy in these apps that the idea would be, okay, this is exactly what you ate, but we really don't have that data. I mean, for us to be able to do that, you'd have to run the analyses on all the food right before you ate it, and of course, that's not sustainable either. So the apps are good kind of on the level of figuring out your calories and macros within a reasonable level of accuracy, but the micronutrients, they're not going to be super accurate to what you truly ate.
I love that phrase, feigned accuracy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the app level, but even something else that we've talked about before is the common errors inside of food logs to begin with. And so when you combined this feigned accuracy with our human, mistakes that we're going to make anyways, and then we look at those numbers, like, it's not even close.
Well, and something else to add on to that, like, I give a lot of people who come through my master class different shorthand ways to handle estimating. And maybe you're just going to log something as cabbage, even though it was a mixed salad, because the caloric density was close enough. Well, right there, we're already now off because you didn't eat only 200 grams of mixed cabbage. It was actually arugula plus like romaine and all of this other stuff. But yet those shorthand systems I give people are what allow them to actually stick to the plan and, actually eat the vegetables. And so there's all of these trade-offs, or when you go out to eat and you log something, it often doesn't have the micronutrient data. So there's all of these things that we do to kind of try to keep ourselves accountable and make the logging a little bit easier, yet we lose the precision of what maybe the micronutrients can be. So yeah, you're right. The log isn't actually accurate as much as we'd like to think it is.
Okay, so given all that, especially on the feigned accuracy of the apps and our belief that if we just get it into our phone, it somehow is real, what do we do instead of that?
Yeah.
Or at least maybe in addition to that, if we're still really want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's some value of apps. We're not eating like 20 times different of whatever nutrients are in there. But nevertheless, I think one of the best things to do is to have confidence that no one before 1970, I mean, we could put that much later, but no one before 1970 was tracking their diet in an app. No one was looking at like micronutrients, like what did I eat today? You know, how much vitamin C was in my apple today? You know, like nobody was. Somehow we got to 1970s, and that was also, I picked that year because that's also before our obesity epidemic started. Somehow we got to 1970s as a species without knowing all of that nutrient composition of everything. And we certainly, up until 1970, especially if we go back pre-1900s, we certainly lived through lots of austere time periods where we didn't have all of this variety of food on demand at a grocery store, right? We might have literally been through a hard winter where we only had 2 or 3 foods. I also like to point out all these other cultures that we revere or look up to in terms of longevity, the blue zones. Well, let me tell you what the blue zone people are not doing. They're not logging in an app every day what they ate to live to 100. So with all of this noise out there about health tech and optimization, it's always good to reality check ourselves and be like, okay, somehow as a human species, there's examples of us being okay, if not thriving without them. And really it comes back to the power of whole foods. And that whole foods, I don't care if it's an orange or it's a steak or whatever, it's spinach, they have a mixture of nutrients in there that once you get across a good percentage of your diet being whole foods, you're probably going to get a lot of these different nutrients that you're after. And I think what happens is we often think about foods as one singular nutrient. Like some people might think about oranges as just vitamin C, but it turns out they also have potassium and vitamin A and folate and even some calcium. And then, you know, people might think about steak as protein, or they might think about it as iron, but guess what? It also has vitamin B12 and zinc and selenium, and on we go. And so you want to think about it as these whole foods, they all have varying levels of these micronutrients and macronutrients. And when that's the base of the diet, and there's some variety among them, you are going to basically fill the buckets or fill the needs of all of these different 30 plus nutrients pretty darn easily. And so when people want to know, okay, am I getting all of the nutrients I need? I can't guarantee it. To guarantee it, I certainly would have to go through the analysis and we'd have to really look at what you're eating and try to do the math. But nevertheless, having some variety of this stuff, we've seen it play out that it works and that people can thrive. So as long as we do that, we should be okay. And what's interesting is this podcast was kind of triggered by a recent question I got in my master class, but at the same time, I happened to come across a study. It's by Matsumoto in the show notes. And basically they were looking at what kind of recommendations do they have to give, and this is specifically in Japan, but what kind of recommendations do they have to give in Japan to help people hit all the recommended numbers of these different micronutrients for their health? And they did kind of these different diet simulations. They just looked at, okay, what if we told them this many fruits and this many vegetables and so on? And they came to the conclusion that if they just had people eat 200 grams of fruit and 350 grams of vegetables per day, that not only would it reduce disease risk, but it would probably be sufficient to meet these nutrient needs of most all of the nutrients. So here they're basically saying, okay, 550 grams of fruits and vegetables, and we're going to get pretty darn close. And so it was kind of interesting to see that, because I think it was just sort of like, wow, I'm recommending 800 grams of fruits and vegetables, which is even more than that. And then they're going to be still having their protein choices, and then they're still going to be having other foods in their diet to round out their calories. But that by the time we get there, again, assuming some diversity in the diet, we are probably all going to be just fine.
Are you worried Japan's going to start the 550 gram
50
challenge?
gram challenge. Hey, I don't think it's going to move the needle as much, especially in terms of body composition. I really like my 800 gram number. But if they get more people eating fruits and veggies, more power to them.
Yep. You said a couple of times, you said some variety amongst them, some diversity. Is it worth mentioning what you mean by some variety, some diversity, or is that even like too specific, too personal to really be able to get into?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to give a really specific answer on that, but I think some of this, especially in our environment, is starting to get into the weeds.
Yeah, okay.
Like, is anybody just only eating potatoes and bean protein powder? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, once we start to look at this across weeks, I just think people are going to have at least a few different fruits and veggies per day, at least a few different protein sources,
Yep.
and at least a few other foods. And again, that might skew more grains, that might skew more nuts, that might skew some processed foods. Nevertheless, it is still going to be a good enough coverage versus, we start to get into some risk when people really try to pick a singular food to represent everything they eat. But then I keep coming back to like, who's doing that? Yeah.
Got it. Are there some edge cases where people should be maybe a little bit more concerned than not? In other words, like for a lot of people, eat some variety, maintain some amount of diversity is good enough for most people. But then are there some people it's like, except for folks like you, and you should take a little bit more concern or a little bit more care?
Yeah, I guess I would pause for anybody who just out of the gates has a complete elimination or complete restriction for whatever reason that might be. Maybe it's allergy, maybe it's, their own ethical beliefs, something like that. But if they say, okay, I never eat dairy or I never eat meat, it can be worth figuring out what nutrients are common to those eliminations to see what you might be missing. And so as opposed to going into an app and looking at your nutrients that they say that you're eating based on some average values, which probably isn't really true to what you're eating, I think you're better off just Googling, like, if I don't eat dairy, what nutrients am I missing? And especially with the improvement in AI, they come back with, okay, you might be missing this. And guess what? These are the sources. And then you can see what are some of the other sources of those items, maybe calcium that would be in dairy that maybe you don't eat dairy. So where would I get calcium from non-dairy sources? And then you look at those foods and you think, do I have any of those foods? You know what I mean? And that's going to be, I think, a better way to target where you might be low, if you will, in certain areas than necessarily just kind of looking at app data or even just trying to supplement just because. The other thing what's really interesting, and I think this gets lost in the am I getting enough of all of my nutrient stuff, is people will look up, like let's keep on this dairy example. Somebody will say, I don't eat dairy, so I'm worried about my calcium. They'll look up the RDA or the recommended dietary allowance for calcium, and for people below 51 years old, it's 1,000 milligrams per day. So people think, oh shoot, I have to hit 1,000 milligrams every day. And that is generally the target, but I think people don't understand that that target is actually set quite high. It's not set at the average value. It's set at looking at the range of what intakes we would think people need for calcium. It calculates the average, and then it moves basically a safety factor of 2, you could think, or for my statisticians, it moves 2 standard deviations up. So basically, it's at the very high end of what we kind of would think almost the maximum amount of calcium would be. So when we hit the RDA, most of us are getting more than we need, which means that not every day do you need to hit the RDA for many, many, many people. And so that's also like another place that, people will look in these apps and they might be like, I'm only at 76% of the calcium. And it's like, well, maybe that's actually plenty for you because the RDA is set to be quite high and to almost be at the upper end, not necessarily what an average would be. And so this is then why we have like doctors and other tests and stuff like that. For example, if we stick on this calcium one, getting your bone density tested becomes a common test, especially later in life. And that can be a great way to check in if calcium is a limiting factor, right? Also, if there is any true vitamin deficiencies, there's going to be some signs and symptoms that your doctor can work through and start testing that way and maybe talk to your diet about any true eliminations. But I think that's going to be the better route of trying to figure out what foods might be missing and to add those back in versus trying to use app data, too closely or to, quote, optimize your diet.
Okay, got it. So I think my 2 big takeaways are, 1, yes, it's okay to eat generally the same thing over many days. And then 2, or maybe this is kind of part 2, which is as long as you're following the general principles laid out inside the 3 pillars method.
I think so. Everything can be taken to a weird extreme. You and your collagen and watermelon only diet, Patrick, if we could just get you to add a little more variety, I think you'd be better off.
No.
But yeah, I think that's what I try to do with nutrition. I sort of am like, okay, this could be interpreted really weird, but if we add some realism to it, who actually only eats 2 foods listening to this podcast ad nauseum for the rest of their life? No, we have some variety. And so with that variety in the fruits and veggies, the protein, and then rounding out your calories, you are going to be fine. And so that was really my intent with the 3 pillars method was like, I knew that our goal was to hit these 30 different nutrients every day, that we had to get all the micronutrients, that we had to get the different macros. But then I also knew, is there a way that we can do this that's actually sustainable? I know I don't even like to weigh and measure my food throughout the year, so I'm certainly not doing it for 30 plus nutrients. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of identifying, okay, cool, these whole foods are really powerful. Let's lean in there. Let's give some basic guidance around there. And then people will be fine from a nutritional composition perspective. And I think just it's good to remind people that I think the less you have to do in your nutrition is actually optimal and more optimized. We talked about it on a very old podcast, but what does kind of like practical optimization look like? And I think people have all of these apps and trackers letting them know like when all these things are happening in their body that are irrelevant, and looking at data perhaps on their micronutrient intake, which is, I don't want to say totally irrelevant, but not really useful or necessary. And we get lost in all of this data stuff. And instead, it's just sort of like, what's the least work that we can do to get the outcomes we want? Because then we start to be sustainable. I mean, if you're trying to optimize your potassium and selenium every day, you're not going to stick to the gosh darn thing, which is a lot of the people that I work with. They're just totally overwhelmed with all the things they have to try to do and track. And now they have a few singular things to focus on, and oh gosh, they're actually able to stick to the plan, right? Yep. So I think it's useful to think about like what really are the fewest pieces of evidence or guidelines that I need to follow that can get me the outcome I want. That's optimal, and that's what I've tried to do with the 3 pillars method.
Perfect. All right. If you want to jump into the app before or even in December, if you're listening to this in December, you'll be able to take part in that accountability challenge that we talked about. Get right in there at optimizemenutrition.com/December. And then make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening or watching this so you don't miss another episode. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.